that was the greatest day of my life. You ever heard someone say that before? That was the best day ever. You heard that? You ever said that before? Greatest day of my life. I'm always interested in hearing what other people name as the best day of their life. The greatest day ever. I remember watching this singing competition show, like American Idol. I think it was American Idol. And I remember watching this girl get voted through to the next round. And she just said, "This is the greatest day of my life." And I remember watching that going, really? I mean, she was 15. Maybe it was. Maybe that was the best day of her life right there. You know, but it made me kind of wonder, where would something like that rank in my list? Winning a singing competition, but getting voted through to the next round of a singing competition, where would that rank among my life's highlights? Probably not as high as it did for her, but it made me think about it though, you know? I mean, it made me think about what are some of the key moments in my own life that have been kind of like turning point moments, you know? I made this timeline of things that happened in my life here. It's not big enough to put everything on there, but I put down like when I was born, because that was a big day for me. I put down when I graduated from high school and I got married and my kids were born and when I moved here to the Quad Cities. And there's other things, other like high points in there, you know, when I got ordained and when I was appointed to different churches and stuff, you know, were big moments. You know, and you notice on the timeline that these are not ranked in order of importance, but they're just moments that were critical moments in my life. And it kind of made me think, what are some of those moments that are key moments, life-changing moments in my life? And what are moments that have just kind of happened? Other things have just happened. You know, you ever think about that for you? Like, if you had your own timeline, what would go on your timeline? Like, what would be the key moments? If you asked that girl in the singing competition, it would have two things, right? Was born, got voted through. You know, to each their own, to each their own. My story, though, is unique to me. Your story is unique to you. My story is unique. And I've got my timeline. And not everything is on my timeline, but my question for you is this. When in my timeline did God enter my story? Where did God enter my story in my timeline? Do you know? It was the right answer, and hopefully you're thinking this, is it was before I was born. The right answer is God entered my story before I was born. You know, we talked about this a little bit last week, Psalm 139. He says, "You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion. As I was woven together in the dark of the womb, you saw me before I was born." So God has been a part of my story since before I was born. And in that sense, it may be more accurate to say that I am part of his story, right? But there's another way of thinking about this idea of God being a part of my story. There's another way of thinking about it, because there is a certain time and place on my timeline when I became aware of God's presence in my life, when I became aware of it. You know, there was this huge chunk of time on my timeline, this huge chunk of time when I either didn't know or didn't care about God's presence. And then something happened that changed my timeline. Something happened where it opened my eyes. I got it, I understood, I recognized that God is there. You know, do you know some people, I know this and you know this, some people have not hit that point on their timeline yet. Right? Where their eyes are opened, their hearts are open. Some people haven't hit that yet. And sadly, some people go their whole lives and their eyes are never opened. Or at least their hearts are never opened to the reality of God's presence. It's sad, and we hope, we pray that that point comes. For me, that happened when I was a teenager. And when I started reading the Bible for myself, I opened it up. My uncle helped me with this, and I opened it up, and I started reading it. And when I read the Bible, what I saw was my own brokenness, my sin. As a teenager, I saw this. I recognized my sin, my inability to be perfect in the presence of God. And I saw that my sin was keeping me away from God. The Bible showed me that. But the Bible also pointed me to the answer to my brokenness, which was Jesus Christ. The Bible showed me that that was the answer to my brokenness and eternal life. And so that was the moment in my timeline, that was the moment that changed my story. I became a Christian. And in my story, all of a sudden in my story, I became the secondary character in my story. And Jesus became the primary character. Because that's how it's supposed to be, isn't it? I mean, that's how it's supposed to be in our story. That once we become a Christian, once we declare Jesus is my Lord, our stories no longer point to us. At that point, our stories point to Him. He becomes the source of our hope. And so all through the month of October, this is what we're talking about as we get ready for Stewardship Sunday at the end of this month. We're talking about this over and over again. Am I a good steward, not of my resources, not of my finances? Am I a good steward of my faith? Am I managing my faith the right way? Am I a good steward of my story, my hope? That's our theme this month, is sharing our hope. When I look at my own timeline, there's this point on my timeline, there's a critical moment on my timeline, when I recognized that Cindy was not just a person in my life, not just a friend, but she was to be my wife. That moment changed my timeline, my whole timeline, because I recognized that from that moment on, my story would never ever again be just about me. From that moment on, it would always be about us. You get that? There's another person in my story from that moment on. This is how it is for Christians, right? One of the turning points for a Christian is when you have that aha moment, that you are no longer the lead character in your own story, that Jesus is now the title character in your story. This is a key moment for us as Christians when we recognize Jesus as Lord. And when He enters your life that way, your story and His story become so intertwined together that His story is your story. Because if Jesus is in your life, and your story still points to you, what that means is that Jesus has probably been invited in as a passenger, but maybe not as Lord. Because when Jesus is invited in as Lord, something profound changes. Something changes in us. When He becomes Lord, Savior, Redeemer in our lives. And it becomes in our lives like a before and after. Before and after. Before Jesus and after Jesus. We all of a sudden have this new awakening of what life was like and what life is now like. And Paul talks about this all the time in Scripture. He really loves this dynamic of before and after. One of my favorite places we see that is in Colossians chapter 3. If you have a Bible, turn there. Colossians 3. It's going to be towards the back in the New Testament. Colossians 3. I'm going to put it on the screen, but if you have a Bible and want to follow along, it's pretty awesome. Let's see. So New Testament, after Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians is the order. Okay? If you hit the back cover, you went just a little too far. Colossians 3. Colossians, I love this. Colossians is a letter that Paul wrote to a church that he founded. He founded this church. And then he went away to found other churches, but he writes letters back to the churches to give them encouragement, to help them stay focused on their growth and on their faith. And this is a letter he writes to the Colossians. It's really good. Let's take a look at what he says. And again, we're paying attention to old versus new, right? What it was like before and what it's like now. So listen to what he says. Since you have been raised to new life with Christ, set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand. Think about the things of heaven, not the things of earth. For you died to this life, and your real life is hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is your life, is revealed to the whole world, you will share in all His glory. So put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. Don't be greedy, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Because of these sins, the anger of God is coming. You used to do these things when your life was still part of this world. But now is the time to get rid of anger, rage, malicious behavior, slander, dirty language. Don't lie to each other, for you have stripped off your old sinful nature and all of its wicked deeds. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. In this new life, it doesn't matter if you are a Jew or a Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbaric, uncivilized, slave or free. Christ is all that matters, and He lives in all of us. Isn't that good? Do you see that? Do you kind of hear the before and after stuff that he talks about? Before and after. Old life, new life. Old behaviors, old focus, new focus. It runs through the whole thing, doesn't it? You know, put on your new nature, he says. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. Every one of us here, every single one of us here, is still in the midst of living out our own story. But what is key for us, this is so important for us, is to recognize the before and after aspect of our personal stories. We have to recognize that. So here's the question. Here's the big question of the day. Ready? Question of the day. What difference has Jesus really, truly made in your life? Why is your life different because of Him? How has His presence impacted the way that you live? And not just His presence, but His forgiveness, His grace, His power, His hope. How has it impacted you? Peter tells us in Scripture, he says, if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. Always be ready to explain it. And that's a challenge for some of us, isn't it? It's a challenge. Because we may understand and know the power of God's presence. We can feel His power. I know the presence of God. I felt His forgiveness. I understand His life and His love and His grace. But to explain it or to talk about it is something that some of us have never really thought of, right? To explain my hope, to talk about my hope is kind of a foreign concept for some people. But Peter is operating under the assumption that people may, and in fact probably will, at some point ask you about your faith, about your hope. Right? He is suggesting that our hope, our faith ought to be evident enough in our lives that other people are going to notice it and want to know more about it. And what are you going to say when they ask? Before and after. Before and after is what God wants to see in every single one of us. Every person on the planet, He wants to see this before and after. But you and I are the ones modeling it. Jessica Hernandez is a student at Palmer. And Jessica has been coming to church here for about a month now. And the first time that I met Jessica, I was immediately taken by her joy. There's this joy about her. And as I've gotten to know her more, what I've seen is that joy comes from Jesus. It comes from her faith. It's rooted and fueled by her faith. That Jesus has impacted her story in a profound way. And so I asked if she would be willing to share that, a little bit about that with us today. You know, what is her story? So Jessica, come on up here and tell us a little bit about your story and how Jesus fits into that.
Good morning. Before I start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Jessica Hernandez. You roll the R. I'm from Laredo, Texas, and I have 2 kids, a dog and a cat named Odie and Loki. So if you'd like to meet them, I have lots of pictures that you can see after the service. Before I start, I have a question to ask that crossed my mind. You don't have to answer, you just think about it. What is your purpose for coming to church? Why do you come to church? What is your motivation? My answer was, because I understand the love that Christ has for me. And I didn't always understand it. I didn't always feel it. It was a process, and actually recently is when I've come to realize His love for me. I'm going to have you guys close your eyes quickly. We're going to do a little activity. Okay, so I'm going to have you close your eyes, and I want you to picture this. I want you to think about this. I want you to picture no trees. There's no breeze. There's no birds in the sky singing. There's no mountains. There's no hills. There's no sun to light up the land. Just darkness. Emptiness. All right, go ahead and open your eyes. And I want you to look around. Look at all the colors. I want you to look at your hands. I want you to look at how perfectly they were made. And all this has to do with because of God, because this was his creation. And I've just recently began to realize his love for me. I grew up in a Baptist church. I grew up with my parents believing in God, and I knew who he was, but I didn't have a relationship with him. I'd pray to him, but very different from how I pray now. So my life with God now is very different from what it was years ago. Before, I would pray for selfish things like, I want all A's. I want a car. Oh, but I hope it's a nice car. I want all sorts of things. Now, with Christ, my prayers are more centered on other people. I pray to be a blessing. I pray that he can use me. I pray for family, for friends. And I've noticed the difference in me as well. I feel happier, a lot more happier. I feel at peace. I've surrendered my life to Christ. And I remember a thing that my mom would always tell me. I would come in and tell her, oh, in the future, I'm going to be married at this age, and I'm going to have this house and these cars, and I'm going to be working as a doctor. And I remember my mom telling me, just very calmly, just says, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Very humbling experience. I realized that God has a plan for me, and all I have to do is surrender to him. There's a picture that I came across as well that it shows a man that's on his knees, and he's praying, oh, please, God, protect me. And all of a sudden, a rock hits him in the back of his head. And he says, why, God, why me? And as he turns around, he sees Jesus behind him with his arms spread out, blocking all these other rocks from coming to pound him and hit him. That's another humbling experience that I had, where at times we don't realize all the blessings that we have, or we don't realize all the things that God's doing in our life. We don't see it. We don't see the big picture, where we just see what's in front of us. And I am very, very grateful that God is in my life, and I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to have a relationship with him. And I'd like to bear my testimony with everyone. I haven't done this in a very long time. This morning was actually the second time I think I've ever bared my testimony with anybody. So I'd like to do that now. I know that Heavenly Father is madly, madly in love with me. I know that he gave his one and only Son to die on that cross for me and for you. I know that he has a plan for me, and I plan to surrender my life to him completely. And before I close, I'd like to share some Bible verses with you that I absolutely love, that help me get through different situations in life. Here's one. And this talks about becoming new. And it says, this is Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. It says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live, in the flesh I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And there's 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And I truly believe that. I believe that I am somebody new. I am not who I used to be. I don't think the same way that I used to think. I don't love like I used to love. The love that I feel now for other people is different. It's true. It's genuine. It's Christ's love. Or the way that I see other people, I am trying my best to be like Christ. And it's hard, but I'm trying my best, and it's a beautiful life. It's different. Some other Bible verses that I absolutely love that I'd love to share with you are, "For I have learned in whatever state I am to be content." This is Philippians 4:11. And the last one I'd like to leave with you is, "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the spirit, do not despise prophecies. Test all things, hold fast what is good, and abstain from every form of evil." And that's 2 Thessalonians 5:16 through 22. Thank you.
I love that line. "I know that God is madly in love with me." Man, that's powerful. What does your story look like? Your own personal story. Now, when you think about your timeline, you may or may not be able to point to a certain moment when Jesus came into your life and all of a sudden you realized that he was there. When people have grown up in the church, sometimes it's hard to find that exact moment, right? But what all Christians ought to be able to do is talk about the difference that Jesus makes for them. We all ought to be able to talk about that. That's what Peter is talking about when he says, be ready to share the source of your hope. Be ready to share that. Recognizing and articulating, informing our story goes a long way towards sharing our hope. And this is what Paul is getting at right up here, right? In this new life, he says, it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or Gentile, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbaric, uncivilized, slave-free. None of that matters. It doesn't matter who you were. It doesn't matter who you were. All that matters is Christ. And he lives in all of us. He lives in us. He's in you. Think about what that means for your story. This is one of the greatest challenges. One of the greatest challenges for Christians is learning how to tell our story. How do I tell my story? If I asked some of you to tell me about your faith, after church, if I stopped you and said, tell me about your faith, some people would have no trouble at all, like talking about Jesus and who he is for them and what life was like before him and what's life like now and how he's made a difference. Some people would have no trouble. Other people, if I said, tell me about your faith, some people would go, and they wouldn't even know where to begin, right? And I understand that. That's just true for some of us. But for those of us who are in that boat, who have trouble with this, I have a little help for you. Right in front of you, in the pews in front of the hymnals, is a sheet of paper. Get that out. Connie, you'll have to reach behind you. It's a sheet of paper. It says "My Story" on it. There's enough for everybody, I promise you. Feel free to even grab 2 or 3 of them if you want to. This sheet, all this is a little bit of help in forming our own story, in trying to understand for ourselves how, when, where did Jesus come into the picture, and what was life like before him, and what's life been like since he was there. Because some of us have never done this. Some of us have never taken this step where we've thought about our story. What does my story look like? What does my story sound like? Some of us have never done this, but this is a good opportunity, because if Peter is right, at some point someone's going to ask you about your faith. Someone's going to ask you about your hope. And we want to make sure that we have a story to tell. So I want to encourage you to take this home with you. This is yours. You can even grab others. They're in front of all the hymnals. You can grab as many as you want and take notes on them and start to formulate what your story sounds like. Because if Christ is in your life, if he is Lord, your story is his story. How do we start to tell that? Now, obviously, there's a danger, right? There's a danger in having a rehearsed story of our faith. Right? My hope is that you will not have a sheet that you pull out, a script that you pull out every time someone asks about the living God and how he's woven into your life. We don't want to have this script. We don't want to have a polished story. The goal is not to have a polished story. The goal is to be comfortable talking about your story. Just be comfortable talking about it. And it starts with taking a new look today at how Jesus has been interwoven and continues to be interwoven in your life. How is life different because of his presence? I would take a stab at saying that all of our stories are going to end the same way. This is my hope, at least. My hope is that all of our stories end the same way, with a triumphant entry into the gates of heaven, immediately embraced by the one who is madly in love with us. Knowing that your story ends that way, how do you start to think about this part of your story now? I want you to take an hour this week, if you can. I know that sounds like a long time, but it's worth it. Take an hour and spend some time with your story. Jot down some notes. Start to think about it. Start to practice talking about it out loud, even to yourself. Say it out loud, even to yourself. And start to form what your story sounds like. Next week, we're going to start to think about who needs to hear your story. Who needs to hear it? But honestly, guys, that doesn't do any good if you don't have a story to tell. So let's take this step first, and we'll do the next part together. Let's pray. My story is your story, Lord, and I want to point to you. Help me this week to reflect on how my life is different, how my life is new because of Jesus. Because of him, I have hope I didn't have before. I have purity that I could never find on my own. I have life, real life, that allows me to stay joyful no matter what else is happening. Because of Jesus, I can pray like this and know that you hear me. Help me with my story. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.